Hi, everybody. Today we will conduct a debate about Applied Behavior Analysis, ABA, and School-Wide Positive Behavior Supports, SWPBS. There is a controversy that has emerged about the relationship between PBS and ABA because SWPBS is sometimes considered an application of Applied Behavior Analysis. Other behavior analysts see it as watered-down ABA, while others see it as in conflict with ABA. Our group members agree, though, that SWPBS and ABA are loosely connected. The core principles of ABA are used to help students at a large scale through SWPBS. There are many differences between ABA and SWPBS. There are also many pros and cons to using SWPBS in the schools. The focus of this debate will be on the training and implementation of SWPBS, the funding of SWPBS in the schools, and how all this relates to the BACB Code of Ethics. Ashley Oakes will be representing the pro side, and Kendra Carlton will be representing the con side for training and implementation. I, Emily Fromo, will be discussing the pros for funding. Sherry Radu will be discussing the cons for funding. Brandy Gordon and Crystal Asensio will be relating our points to the ethics codes. Crystal will be representing the pro side, and Brandy Gordon will be representing the con side. Before we start the debate, though, I would like to do some background information about what ABA and School-Wide Positive Behavior Supports is. So what is ABA? It's the process of applying interventions based upon the principles of learning theory to improve socially significant behaviors to a meaningful degree and to demonstrate that the interventions employed are responsible for the improvement in behavior. This is from the Eden 2 programs from 2017. Some components of ABA include the use of reinforcement to increase desired behaviors, teaching generalization of skills to use in everyday life, and that interventions are evaluated and modified to meet the needs of the child and to ensure that the child is making growth. So then what is school-wide positive behavior support? According to the Kansas Institute in 2009, it's a systematic approach for implementing proactive school-wide discipline. Some goals of SWPBS include improving school climate, preventing student problem behaviors across all school settings, building a culture in the school that promotes good behavior, the early identification of students in need of additional support, directly teaching the skills necessary to have positive behavior success, and actively using data for decision-making. There are 7 dimensions of ABA, and all of them are in some way related to SWPBS. The first one is applied. Both ABA and SWPBS teach socially important behaviors to improve the quality of life of individuals. According to an article by Anderson and Kincaid in 2005, it would be difficult to argue that addressing school discipline and academic outcomes is not important to our society. They are behavioral. Both focus on behaviors that can be measured. According to the same article by Anderson et al. 2005, they suggest using discipline referrals to measure the increase or decrease in behaviors. The next dimension is analytic. Can you prove a control group versus an intervention group? According to a study by Tobin et al. 2002, he used A/B designs to evaluate the effects of SWPBS. 4 out of the 5 schools he tested showed a reduction of more than 85% in office referrals since implementing SWPBS. Technological. Educators need training to be able to implement, and they need to implement the interventions the correct way using implementation fidelity. According to an article by Sugai and Horner from 2002, they suggested ensuring that at least 80% of faculty and staff agreed to implement SWPBS before starting it up. They are conceptual. They use data-based assessments in decision-making, and the intervention components are derived from research. They are effective. There has been a major decrease in office discipline referrals. SWPBS is applied in a way that will be maintained over time. And there's generality. SWPBS is implemented in the natural school environment. Teaching appropriate behaviors at school will generalize in everyday life. There are some values that ABA and SWPBS share. Like I mentioned earlier, they both have socially significant goals. They work on increasing desired behaviors and decreasing problem behaviors. Their interventions are somewhat similar. ABA's interventions, though, are designed for one-on-one therapy, whereas SWPBS, their interventions are designed for entire schools. They use data-based assessments in decision-making. ABA uses individual assessments to make decisions, and SWPBS uses data to place students into tiers. And now Ashley will talk to you more about the tiers of SWPBS.
Thank you, Emily. School-wide PBS is broken down into 3 different tiers, or 3 different levels. Tier 1 is the first tier, and it's the primary intervention. This is universal, and it provides support to all students in the school. Approximately 80% of students are successful with the supports they receive in Tier 1. The second tier, Tier 2, is presented for students who are at risk and are unsuccessful in Tier 1. Tier 2 can be presented in many ways, such as small group supports and peer mentoring. Approximately 15% of students receive support in Tier 2. The final tier is Tier 3, and this is presented for students who are high risk and are unsuccessful with supports presented in Tiers 1 and 2. Tier 3 is presented in intensive individualized supports, and students receive specialized support such as a functional behavioral assessment and a behavior intervention plan. Approximately 5% of students receive support in Tier 3. The benefit of SWPBS in the 3 tiers is that support is not just limited to a small population of students. 100% of students receive support in the primary level, which is Tier 1. And those who need additional supports above Tier 1 receive this extra supports that they need. SWPBS is a proactive intervention approach designed to teach appropriate student behaviors. It focuses on non-aversive implementation strategies, such as reinforcing positive behavior rather than punishing negative behavior. The 3 levels of PBS relate to ABA in that both utilize antecedent stimuli, reinforcement strategies over punishment strategies, and the collection, analysis, and monitoring of data. According to Curtis et al. 2010, SWPBS has 5 main components. The components are a leadership team, a brief overriding school-wide philosophy, specific behavioral guidelines for each area of the school, individual classroom guidelines, and specific strategies for students who need extra attention. Curtis et al. Conducted a study over a 4-year period utilizing the 3 tiers and 5 main components in a public elementary school. The baseline years were the 2002-2003 school year, and the final treatment year was 2006-2007. The number of behavioral referrals, extended timeouts, out-of-school suspensions, or OSS, and instructional days lost were observed. From the school years 2002 to 2003 to 2006-2007, there was a total decrease of 47.8% in behavioral referrals, a 1.7% decrease in extended timeouts, a 67% decrease in OSS, and a 56.5% decrease in instructional days lost. So as you can see, the 3 tiers and the 5 components of SWPBS produce numerous positive benefits.
You mentioned the tiers and the success rate of students. However, you don't mention the professional development. According to the role of role of professional development and multi-level coaching in promoting evidence-based practice by Wood et al., teachers in all tiers find it difficult to identify and evaluate the quality of the practices. Also mentioned in the article by Wood et al., professional development does not always meet the students' needs, and the teachers do not always have the supporting materials needed for their students, which can result in low success rates. According to the PBIS website, there are no clear guidelines for implementation of Tier 3 because research is still ongoing. Because of this, teachers involved in working with Tier 3 students do not feel supported and say students don't show improvement and they see very few problem behaviors reduced. ABA has set guidelines for implementation, therapist support, training in how to handle severe problem behaviors, and provides primarily one-on-one service for children. These are all examples of why SWPBS is watered down ABA.
SWPBS is implemented across the United States at all levels, geographic locations, and school sizes. SWPBS is implemented in preschools, elementary, middle, and high schools in urban, suburban, and rural school districts. It's also implemented in schools and districts that are small, medium, and large in population sizes. SWPBS and ABA are both growing practices. According to Spalding, Horner, May, and Vincent 2008, and Solomon et al. 2012, SWPBS is implemented in more than 30 states and 7,900 schools across the United States. Additionally, there is a low abandonment rate of SWPBS. A 5-year study was conducted by Nice et al. And published in 2016. 915 schools participated in the study and were tracked for a 5-year period after the initial PBS training. At the end of the study, 93% of schools continued the practices of SWPBS, whereas only 7% abandoned the practices.
You say that SWPBS is implemented across the U.S. at all ages, geographic locations, and school sizes. But according to the article, the relationship of school-wide positive behavior supports to academic achievement in an urban middle school by Lassen et al., urban schools were more prone to have frequent and strong problem behaviors. Because of this, studies have shown no improvement in urban schools where PBS has been implemented. You are also correct in saying more than 30 states use SWPBS. According to an article, a meta-analysis of school-wide positive behavior support, an exploratory study using single case synthesis by Solomon et al. States 31 out of the 50 states have SWPBS implementation and training. However, 25 of those 31 states actually have a PBIS website with guidelines and support in that state. The study done in the article Predicting Abandonment of School-Wide Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports by Nessie et al. Says there is only a 7% abandonment rate. However, this study was only done on 3 out of the 31 states, which is only 9.7% of the states that have SWPBS. Also, the states that participated in the study were noted as states that have strong active networks for PBS. ABA therapy is available in almost every state, which is why SWPBS is believed to be watered down ABA.
Another benefit of SWPBS is that it is in relation to bully prevention. According to a journal article published by Minicini in Salma Valley in 2017, there's a wide variety and prevalence rates of bullying. However, it has been estimated that approximately 35% of all individuals are bullied in their lifetime. SWPBS can help prevent bullying through bully prevention and positive behavior support, also known as BP-PBS. BP-PBS is designed to teach the concept of being respectful to all students in a school. It is to teach a 3-step response: stop, walk, and talk, to minimize social reinforcement when disrespectful behavior is encountered, to pre-correct the 3-step response prior to entering activities where problematic behaviors are likely to occur, teach appropriate replies when the 3-step response is used, and train staff on the universal strategy for responding when students report incidents of problem behavior. Bully prevention in PBS fits under Tier 2 guidelines, small group support within SWPBS. Ross and Horner conducted a study in an Oregon school district across 3 elementary schools, grades K through 5, that already had implemented SWPBS to determine if there was a functional relationship between the implementation of BP-PBS and a reduction in physical and verbal aggression on the playground during lunch recess. 2 students from each school were nominated. All 6 of these students were above the 20th percentile in the category of problem behavior and had occurrences of physical aggression, such as hitting, biting, kicking, choking, stealing, throwing objects, or restricting freedom of movement, and verbal aggression, teasing, taunting, threatening, negative body language, or negative gestures. The occurrences of physical aggression and verbal aggression were observed over 10-minute observation periods. The students had a combined baseline mean aggression of 3.1 occurrences per 10-minute observation. After treatment, the students had a combined mean aggression of 0.9 occurrences per 10-minute observations. This is a 72% decrease overall of aggressive occurrences. Additionally, victim and bystander responses were observed during each aggression occurrence. The responses observed were to say stop, walk away or helping to walk away, delivering a positive reinforcing response, delivering a negative reinforcing response, and delivering no response at all. Overall, victims and bystanders increased the use of saying stop and walking away from the situation. Victims decreased the negative reinforcing responses, such as complaining and fighting back, and bystanders decreased the positive reinforcing responses, such as cheering and laughing. This study shows that BP-PBS decreases bullying occurrences and has an overall positive impact on victim and bystander responses after implementation. Overall, ABA and SWPBS are loosely connected because of the same usage of antecedent stimuli, reinforcement, and data analysis, the increased need and usages of both practices nationwide, and the prevalence of helping those in need, such as bully prevention in PBS and treatments for those with autism in ABA.
Bully prevention is important in all schools, but bully prevention and positive behavior support may not always work. According to the article, Integrating Bully Prevention into School-Wide Positive Behavior Support by Good et al., proper PBS implementation needs to be established before proper bully prevention can be put into action. This means that if PBS doesn't work in a school, the bully prevention is also not going to work in the school. The article also mentions the lack of training resources and the huge time commitment makes it hard for bully prevention to be implemented, and most schools don't see improvement for many years. In the ABA therapy setting, there are less children and it's typically one-on-one, which can make bully prevention easier to implement and more effective. This is yet another example of why SWPBS is watered down ABA. As you can see, there are many pros and cons to training and implementation of SWPBS. Now I'll hand it over to Emily and Sherry to discuss funding.
Thanks, Kendra. The first point I'm going to talk about is the cost range for schools to implement PBS. The cost range is typically $3,000 to $9,266 per school annually for the first 2 years. This is from an article by Horner et al. From 2012. It is $400 per year after that. This is extremely affordable after the first 2 years because the district will not need additional professional support. So table 1 here shows the initial cost per school for the first 2 years of implementation at $4,633. This amount is doubled underneath it in case of unanticipated costs such as staff turnover or the need to hire additional support or provide additional training. The second table here from the same article shows that if you added 30 new schools to the 15 pilot schools that already have SWPBIS implemented, the cost per school would be $3,000 with an additional $400 per school per year for the data applications. Some schools also consider hiring a behaviorist or a BCBA for the first 2 years to implement the system, but the school is better off paying for professional development workshops for their teachers to attend rather than paying another expensive salary. If you look at the cost, it's about the same cost for an entire new reading curriculum. This amount could pay for multiple student books and teachers' manuals. It's very affordable because it can be pulled from other funds such as PTO or athletics. Investing in preventing problem behaviors will pay off in the long run. And according to an article by Lewis from 2012, SWPBS will eliminate the need for after-school detentions and in-school suspensions. In addition, it will make the students' grades raise and their test scores as well. This is loosely connected to ABA because a lot of families find it hard to fund and be able to afford to provide ABA for their child. A lot of families have to use their own health insurance or even pay out of pocket for these expenses. So it's really helpful for these families that their kids can get some behavioral support at school in a more affordable way.
Hi. All these benefits are well and good, but the cost you cited are for a reduced dosage, which directly affects fidelity. And a 2009 Horner et al. Study by many of the same authors as the 2012 Horner study that you cited stated one of the limitations of the study that was cause for careful interpretation of the results was the fact that some schools had reduced training fidelity due to lower doses of the intervention, so 1 to 2 days of training instead of 5 to 6 days from less experienced trainers. Yet the 2012 Horner article that you cited doesn't calculate costs using 5 to 6 days of training, and they only show costs for Tier 1 and for the first 2 years of implementation, not the 5 years that is recommended. Furthermore, the actual costs are much more than even your high-end estimate of $9,226 per school. In 2016, the state of North Carolina estimated costs to be $209 per student. Now, that's a far cry from the estimates you cited, unless the plan is that each school only has 44 students. This illustrates how grossly underestimated the costs to implement are. Lastly, as I mentioned before, your stated cost estimates do not consider the cost of implementing the second and third tier of SWPBS and doesn't accurately reflect the ongoing costs that would realistically occur. The sample PBS 5-year developmental plan here, taken from the Training and Professional Developmental Blueprint for Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports by Lewis 2016, illustrates my point. This blueprint shows a 5-year implementation plan showing 10 days of training just in year 1, 16 days in year 2, 11 days in year 3, 12 days in year 4, and 12 days again in year 5, totaling 61 days of intensive training. Again, this is only the intensive training days and does not account for the costs of a district coordinator, staff required to implement the training, or the hiring of outside supports or hiring of district employees to complete, implement, and monitor the level 2 and 3 supports. And without proper funding to implement all 3 tiers with fidelity, the efficacy of SWPBS is compromised. That is why it is watered down ABA.
Implementing PBS in Tier 1 will decrease problem behaviors, therefore freeing up money to utilize for Tiers 2 and 3. Sherry, you had mentioned that my cost did not include financing for implementing services for Tiers 2 and 3. However, implementation of Tier 1 first is necessary in order to determine what students are in need of Tier 2 or 3 supports. So if you see here, this bar graph shows a school's office discipline referrals, and it shows here that in 1994 and 1995, they had well over 2,500 referrals per school year, and after implementing PBS, the totals keep decreasing until the most recent on this graph is 2006 to 2007. It was well under 500 referrals that year, and it just shows that this impact is sustained over time, and this is from Lewis, an article by Lewis from 2016. I have another graph here that shows similar results. The first 2 years the school implemented PBS, their green and blue bars here are high, but then once they get to their 3rd year after implementation, you can show the drastic reduced amount of office discipline referrals. You can also get funding for Tiers 2 and 3 through IDEA. A portion of federal funds is reserved for SWPBS and may be used at the school district's discretion. 15% of IDEA's funds must be used for early intervention services for at-risk children. These services are for students who need academic or behavioral support in the gen ed classroom. This allows for these services to be used for PBIS or RTI support. And this is from the Council for Exceptional Children in 2008. This is loosely connected to ABA because ABA comes into play at Tier 3. Getting the behaviors under control in Tier 1 provides more funding and support for Tier 3.
Okay, first off, according to Simonson, Shugai, and Negron, 2008, even with effective Tier 1 interventions in place, a group of students, approximately 11% of elementary, 26% of middle, and 29% of high school will receive additional behavioral supports to experience success. Additionally, Simonson states that practices typically focus not only on intensifying the supports provided in the primary tier, but that systems are also established, i.e. a team to run the second and third tier interventions to ensure that these adopted practices are implemented with fidelity and that data are regularly collected, reviewed, and actually used to make decisions. That team that runs the second and third tier costs money, and IDEA funding is not adequate to cover those costs. As you can see from this graph, the yellow bars are where full funding should be, and the blue bars are where they actually are. So those costs are not going to be covered by IDEA. In fact, since 1975, Congress has promised to fully fund IDEA at 40% of each state's excess costs, yet funding is only at 16% of the national average per pupil expenditure as of fiscal year 2004. The differences between excess costs and per pupil expenditure are too detailed to get into now, but suffice to say, it's currently underfunded, and I do not expect the current federal administration to push for their future. Do you? So to wrap this up, without adequate funding to follow through with fidelity standards and data reviews that ensure regular collection, review, and use to make decisions across all three tiers of intervention platforms, SWPBS is nothing more than watered down ABA.
There are also grant opportunities. There are also many grant opportunities and money saving tips for school districts to look into. Some schools choose to add PBS to their school improvement plan. This allocates dollars for this plan for PBS. Safe and drug-free schools also, they are required to distribute 93% of their funds to local education agencies to provide instructional materials and programs for schools. Walmart gives out $1,000 per year in grants to schools. Sam's Club donates money to schools of employees that volunteer. Some schools choose to dedicate one of their own school fundraisers to implementing PBS each year. They could also hire a grant writing employee that's very familiar with writing grants and will bring money into the school. And then some schools choose to get additional funding through donations from parents and local businesses, the PTO, and incentives that are free, such as extra recess, Gene Days, and high school helpers. These ideas are all from Florida's Positive Behavioral Support Plan in 2007. Shown here, I found an article from Rafael from 2011. They have lists of free or inexpensive rewards for individuals with students at the elementary level, some that they can give to the whole class, and then even more for kids at the secondary level. And I thought that these were very helpful for schools looking to implement SWPBS on a budget. This is loosely connected to ABA because a lot of families also look for grants to afford ABA for their children. Through Thrive Behavioral Services, I found lots of grants for families. Act Today, Aid for Autistic Children Foundation, and the Anchor of Hope Foundation are just to name a few, and there are many more grants out there for families that want to give their child ABA services.
Okay, this graph illustrates the likelihood of actually getting funding from grants, which is actually quite low. Of roughly 66,400 grant-making foundations tracked in the Foundation Center's database in 2003, close to 34,000, well over half, indicated that they give only to pre-selected organizations and don't even accept unsolicited grant proposals. In addition, multi-year grants are very concerning for gifting organizations, as they are reducing support because they're worried about the continued economic volatility. Grant approval rates vary and a hard and fast number was hard to get, but as this graph illustrates, only 35% of grant foundations fund more than half of the applications they receive, while 35% fund less than a quarter of the applications they receive. And aside from that, you mentioned hiring someone to write the grant applications. Well, that will cost money too. And lastly, given that SWPBS takes 3 to 5 years to fully implement, will grants last for that duration? And will they cover the already underestimated ongoing costs? Shugai and Horner 2006 state that although grant support can be used to seed school reform efforts, this type of funding may not be sustainable or replicatable. It goes without saying that without lasting and meaningful changes, SWPBS is still nothing more than watered down ABA.
Once implemented, schools will also save on administrative and instructional time. For example, if a school were to receive 5,100 discipline referrals per year, that would take away 160 entire school days away from that administrator. This is from an article by Lewis from 2016. That's absolutely insane that they would spend half their school year dealing with discipline referrals. According to Simonson et al., when schools implement SWPBS, they typically experience decreases in inappropriate behaviors as measured by decreases in discipline referrals, suspensions, and expulsions. For example, when SWPBS was implemented in one urban middle school, office discipline referrals decreased by 20%, in-school conferences by 17%, and school suspensions by 57%. And that's from an article by Warren from 2006. Additionally, when SWPBS reduces the amount of time spent on dealing with behavioral problems, time usually spent on discipline is recovered, thus improving student exposure to academic material and allowing resources to be spent on more positive learning activities. And this is from an article by Lassen et al. From 2006. This will free up the schedule for deans and vice principals that spend a majority of their time dealing with discipline referrals. They can use this free time to write grants and plan fundraisers for PBS. This would bring more money to the school district. They could also research and schedule workshops to train their employees more on SWPBS. This is loosely connected to ABA because more focus can be placed on students in tiers 2 and 3 that may need ABA services and are requiring more support.
This is all at invisible savings. Most staff in schools are on salaries, and these freed up hours would actually not really mean any savings. Unless you can pay your people less or bring in more funds with their newfound downtime, then it's not an actual tangible savings. Next, staff can't write grants, which requires them to write grants. So it's kind of a circular issue. And this is all a moot point because there are no tangible savings. And as stated many times already, without adequate funding, SWPBS is not even loosely connected to ABA. Now, as behavior analysts, we have a responsibility to our clients, the students in the division in this case, to advocate for the appropriate amount and level of service provisions and oversight required to meet the defined behavior change program goals. They're also ethically bound to advocate for the most effective treatment procedures and to ensure that the rights of our primary clients supersede those of third parties. To further discuss the ethics between the implied relationship between SWPBS and ABA, Brandy and Crystal will take it from here.
What are ethics? Ethics are behaviors, practices, and decisions that address such basic and fundamental questions such as what is the right thing to do, what's worth doing, and what does it mean to be a good behavior analytic practitioner. The first compliance code that I'm going to discuss is integrity. According to the board, behavior analysis are truthful and honest and arrange the environment to promote truthful and honest behavior in others. Behavior analyst behavior conforms to the legal and ethical codes of the social and professional community of which they are members. According to an article published in 2015 by Putnam and Kincaid, treatment integrity assessments are conducted at each tier. To ensure progress is being made amongst all students, teams can meet on a monthly basis to review data and productivity. At this time, they are able to make decisions to improve or sustain integrity, as well as make any needed changes to the implementation of the program to ensure success across the board.
That's true under 1.4, but also in a peer-review article from Jespin and Rick from 2009, it states that class sizes reduction requires schools to decrease class sizes in first and second grade prior to reducing the size of kindergarten and third grade classes. Yes, they may be successful in K through 3, but then they can't rearrange the environment once they passed in their it's not a natural learning environment. Again, why it's watered down ABA.
According to Compliance Code 4.03, Individualized Behavior Change Plan, behavior analysis must tailor behavior change programs, environmental variables, assessment results, and goals of each client. According to the board, according to an article published in 2008 by Simonson, Sugar, and Negron, tertiary interventions are designed to support individual students who require additional support to benefit from secondary or primary tier interventions, or whose behaviors are serious enough to require more immediate and intensive support. Interventions at this level are very similar to applied behavior analysis due to the fact that they are individualized for each student while also coinciding with the school-wide policies that are already in place.
Next, SWPBS do not follow code 4.3. Behavior analysts must tailor behavior change programs to unique behavior, environmental variables, assessment results, and the goal of each client. But that's not always the case in SWBFEs. And in 2006, an article by Holman et al. States, school systems are not responsible for meeting every need of their students, but where the need directly affects the learning, the school must meet the change in ABA behavior. We do not get to pick or choose what behaviors we find that's going to affect their learning compared to at school. That's their own. We look at what the quality of life is going to be, not just one aspect. And again, this is why it's just watered down ABA.
The last compliance code that I'm going to discuss is 2.02, responsibility. Behavior analysis responsibility is to all parties affected by behavior analytic services. When multiple parties are involved and could be defined as a client, a hierarchy of parties must be established and communicated from the outset of the defined relationship. Behavior analysis identify and communicate who the primary ultimate beneficiary of the services is, in any given situation, and advocates for his or her best interests. As stated by the same article, Simonson, Sugar, and Negron, SWPBS employs a 3-tier approach to behavior support to proactively address the social behavior needs of all students and prevent social and academic failure. This tier is designed to support all students and staff across the settings in the school. Meaningful outcomes are identified for all students and staff. Data is examined to determine if outcomes are met, and practices are implemented to maximize the success of all students. And systems are selected to also ensure that practices are implemented with fidelity by staff. Because of this, I would have to say that SWPBS and ABA are loosely connected.
The last point I will bring up is ethics code. Uh, 1.2 boundaries of competence. All behavior analysts provide services, teach, and conduct research only within their boundaries of their competence, defined as being commensurate with their education, training, and supervised experience. And I bring an article by Jespen and Ricken from 2009 stating, the reform created 25,000 new teaching positions in its first 2 years. Many of these positions were filled by teachers without certification or prior teaching experience. In ABA, before an individual can even take the BCBA test, they must first complete a certain amount of hours and have their master's degree in applied behavior analysis compared to teachers who didn't need to compete the teaching. Again, shows why SWCBA is watered down ABA and the requirements needed on the ethical side. Even in my personal life here in the Central Valley, just to work with children, you need to have your RBT and have a bachelor's degree. And that is the last point I would be making for why it's watered down ABA.
Okay, well, thank you for listening so far. To summarize, our group has discussed multiple issues regarding SWPBS's relationship to ABA during our debate. Ashley and Kendra spoke to the pros and cons of training and implementation, pointing out that the 3 tiers, if implemented with fidelity and consistency, can provide socially significant changes, including bully prevention, to not only the school environment, but all of its participants. Myself discussed the ins and outs of financing Section Endeavor, and again realized that if properly funded, the benefits can be substantial and include decreases in discipline referrals, suspensions, expulsions, which in turn keeps learners in the educational settings they need to be in to learn. Lastly, Brandy and Crystal debated various ethical codes in which behavior analysts operate and how they relate to SWPBS. Again, with proper funding, SWPBS utilizes assessments at each tier and rely on data to make treatment and programming decisions that are tailored to whole schools, small groups, and individuals as needed. Lewis and Newcomer 2002 summarized the intended outcomes and central themes of SWPBS quite nicely. They stated that the intended outcome of SWPBS are to prevent problem behavior, intervene early when problem behaviors are first noted, and provide comprehensive individual behavior support plans. The second theme is teaching appropriate behavior, building multiple opportunities to practice appropriate social skills and to receive feedback on their use, and altering environments so that they support students who display behavioral challenges. All of these very clearly reflect the goals and dimensions of ABA as summarized by Emily in our introduction and provide the scientific backbone of evidence-based practices for SWPBS. Although the overall concepts and goals of SWPBS are very much in line with ABA, there are several challenges to full implementation fidelity. The primary challenge is the struggle for school districts to attain adequate funding. You heard that over and over again in our debate. Unfortunately, it's this lack of funding that severely hampers the implementers' ability to adequately train staff initially, and more importantly, provide ongoing supports that are vital to attain and maintain a high level of fidelity, which of course directly affects efficacy. Given all this, we argue that school-wide positive behavior supports are loosely connected to ABA. Thank you for watching our debate. References will follow. Oh no. And that's it.